And in an interesting reversal, when we sit down for our liturgical ritualistic practices, we are told that invoke God as a guest in your home. You invoke God as a guest and you go through all the steps. So guest is God, God is guest. And I have thought about this obfuscation. And in the light of the Hindu, the history of India, and some very interesting things, come, because what might be the possible effects and influence on, of this Atithi Devo Bhava on the repeated colonization of India, starting from Alexander the definitely not great to not so great Britain, all the way. And but this Atithi Devo Bhava stuck, and so the first reaction of any Hindu leader welcoming a guest, was to give them land, to build places of worship, food and water to drink, places to build houses, and all these things. And so history shows that we had two kinds of guests. The first ones were somehow, we can put them under the category of those fleeing oppression and persecution of various kinds. Notably, we have the Zoroastrians who came from Iran, then Persia, and then we have another example of Jews, who came and settled in India. And so they came and they lived in harmony with others, and they were very, they were very happy with the treatment meted out to them. Then we had some other kind of guests. Perhaps it's best to call them pests, not guests. They include the colonizers and, marauders, people who just came to loot and pillage and so many things like that. And then they come under the second category because they wanted to conquer, they wanted to colonize by exploiting the vulnerabilities of their hosts. It's very easy to see the face of God in the first type of guest. But then when we start to look at the face of God in the second type of guest, then that becomes a definition of sainthood, really. We have to evolve to be saintly, to be able to do that. So, British rule in India, as an example of this, as elsewhere, relied on missionary education and Christian evangelism as the two indispensable arms of the colonial enterprise. And this is something which is, studied about a lot, so I'm just going to talk about this briefly. And this is something which we see very frequently in the writings of the, the political people of the time and the thinkers, like Lord Macaulay, one of the greatest proponent of British education in India. He wrote to his father in 1836, "No Hindu who has received an English education ever remains sincerely attached to his religion. It is my firm belief that if our plans of education are followed up, there will not be a single idolater among the respectable classes in Bengal 30 years from now, 30 years hence. And this will be effected without any effort to proselytize, without the smallest interference in the notion of religious liberty, merely by the operation of knowledge and education." And he ends the quote by saying, "I heartily rejoice in the prospect." So this is something, is very much part of the Hindu history. The scars of enduring nearly 1,000 years of colonization run deep. I am one of the survivors of that scar. I carry that scar till today. And, that's why we have to work on it. We have to work on it to be able to go beyond that. And it has resulted in many things. The scar on the nationalism level has resulted in simply duplicating the policies of the colonizers, the policy of self-hatred, the policy of suspicion, the policy of divide and conquer for several decades in India, to the extent that even after 7 decades of independence, the Hindu intelligentsia in India finds it difficult to embrace its religious identity without agony or apology. What it means to be a Hindu is anybody's guess, really. Yeah, anybody can, wonder. And in fact, it is something that is privately tormented over rather than publicly stated or debated. This is something which is very sad. And because when an identity is maimed, it is not easy to be reclaimed. This is what is the whole thing. And this, this kind of an angst takes many forms on the individual and collective levels. On the individual levels, I have people wondering, am I a Hindu? And I tell them, if you're wondering that, that's the first criterion of belonging to the Hindu tradition. Yeah. So if you're wondering, am I a Hindu? You are definitely a Hindu. And then there is another class of people who say, I'm not a Hindu because I believe in everything. When they say they believe in everything, they mean they believe in the sanctity of everything, And so if you believe in the sanctity of everything and in the right of everyone to pray however they want, then you are definitely a Hindu. Stop wondering, okay? Yeah. And then this is on the individual level. On the collective level, we have many different trends. And one of them I would like to talk about is that, there are Hindu religious groups in India who are resorting to the tactic of abnegating the epithet and umbrella of Hinduism by petitioning the government for what is called minority status. And one such thing was, dismissed in the court because this group, a very well-established, Hindu group, suddenly said, we are minorities. Why? Because we believe in love and compassion. And the Supreme Court said that, that is in fact the teachings of the Hindu tradition. So you cannot say you are not Hindu, And then there is another group, another monastic order who has filed for minority status in South India, and we are, awaiting a court hearing. And so such instances are testament to a collective angst about religious and national identity, and sadly suggest that one is accorded better treatment as a religious minority in India rather than as a member of a majority religious group. This is something which is very interesting. So there was a whole kind of a couple of years back, we find that there is a nascent resurgence of Hindu identity since 2014, and it must be understood within the two contexts that I just spoke about, as a yearning to discover oneself by shedding the colonial legacy of self-loathing and self-denial, and as a retaliation against the continued evangelical and cross-planting practices by missionaries of various denominations. The right to profess one's faith cannot include a mandate to proselytize others, thereby eroding their rights to practice their own faiths freely. This is what I said at the 2006 Vatican Conference on Conversion, organized by the Pontifical Council of Interreligious Dialogue in Lariano, Italy. I was very happy with this dialogue. I was so, happy to go there. This was something, earth-shattering, and I'm very glad that the Pontifical Council, convened this dialogue, because it was for the first time that the people from indigenous traditions were actually felt heard. They were actually heard. We were able to talk and listen to one another, and then there were other leaders, a few other leaders of indigenous cultures and religious traditions in attendance, and everyone shared powerful testimonies of the diverse, of how their diverse cultures were decimated, the erasure of traditional and religious identities in various parts of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And as I sat and listened through these testimonies, they sadly sounded all too familiar. That they could be happening in India, you know. And this was also a very path-breaking conference, because we had resolutions from the first conference, and this was, I'm just going to focus on two of them. The first one said, we affirm that while everyone has a right to invite others into an understanding of their faith, it should not be exercised by violating other people's rights and sensibilities. And then it ended, that first resolution ended on a radical note. At the same time, everyone should heal oneself of the obsession of converting others. And then the second resolution read that, that freedom of religion enjoins upon everyone equally the non-negotiable responsibility to respect and never to denigrate, vilify, or misrepresent others' faiths for the purposes of affirming superiority over one's beliefs. And after this meet, I heard that the Vatican went on to convene 2 other conferences on the same theme with the Jews and the Muslims, all with the objective of drawing up an ethical code governing religious proselytization. I do not know if such a code exists. Maybe the nuncio will be able to talk about it, but if it doesn't, I do hope the Vatican will pursue this further. So this is something which, which leads us to the next thing, war and conflict resolution. At the level of our practice, the Hindu tradition is totally committed to ahimsa or non-violence. This practice is encouraged not only in action, but also in our spoken word. Very important to learn. The Hindu child is taught what to say, and more importantly, what not to say, and when to say it, when not to say it. So these become very, very important things in our dharma, in our tradition. And our whole life is governed by non-violence, and it's a absolute value. That's why it's called ahimsa paramo dharma. So if we have to pick out one value out of all the values in the Hindu tradition, it is non-violence. That is how we won the freedom struggle very easily, through this non-violence under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, and then it became a source of inspiration for oppressed people's struggles in the United States, South Africa, and elsewhere. So the Veda encourages the practice of non-violence in all transactions, and like in the Bible, the use of arms for resolving conflicts comes at the very, very end. And so after all diplomacy fails, you can take up arms, especially if the one that is standing before you is an atatayin. Atatayin means an aggrandizer who is engaged in the occupation of other people's territories, arson, pillage, exploitation, creating discord, dishonoring womankind. However, even while dealing with such a person, there are ethical rules of engagement governing wartime exercises as they govern the everyday exercises. You cannot wage war, for example, on somebody that is disarmed, without arms. Ashastrapani, you cannot wage war. And then you cannot wage war on somebody who is unable to defend themselves. You cannot wage war on a people or individuals weaker than you physically. And so that is what is called dharma. It is a universal matrix of life and of norms. I think in the Catholic tradition it would be the golden rule. Do unto others as you want others to do unto you. That is basically what dharma is. So we don't think of dharma as mandate from God. We think of it as a very manifestation of God, the voice of God in our hearts. And so the one who lives close to dharma, is very close to God. Such a person is regarded as a saintly person, and it is something that for everyone to emulate. You become a dharmic person, you become an ethical person, and this is something which transcends all religions, because I think this is something where, when one lives a life conforming to what is right, what is correct, what is appropriate. So this is how we grow emotionally through inner strength to conform to dharma. And then the last part, the poverty and the alleviation of poverty, we don't see it as the alleviation of poverty, because we are no one to alleviate anything, because all resources belong to God. Who are we to give charity, really? So basically we see that charity or sharing as a way of growing into being a dharmic person, growing into being someone who is ethical. For that growth cannot happen without sacrifice. This is something the Catholic tradition understands all too well, the concept of sacrifice. And this sacrifice here is the sacrifice of one starting with one's own ego, starting with one's own resources. You give, hriya deyam, bhiya deyam, samvida deyam. You give with humility. You give with a feeling, I'm sorry, I don't have enough to give. This is nothing. And then you don't speak about it. The next time you see the person, you don't say, what did you do with the donation I gave you? That is not something, you don't flaunt it. Neither do you go and write about it in your blog. I'm sure the Samaritan, if the Samaritan was living today, he would not write in the blog what he did to the person on the road. That is the whole idea here. And then, unfortunately, economic hierarchy appears to be a very unfortunate reality in all the societies that we have. And what the Bhagavad Gita says here is of note, because Bhagavad Gita is a scripture that summarizes the message of the Vedas. And it says that, she says that poverty is due to overconsumption, hoarding, and abuse of resources by a few who regularly flout universal laws and disturb the fine balance in nature by taking, no giving back. This is what the Bhagavad Gita says, and calls such people who engage in such practices as thieves and a blot on Mother Earth. The Hindu tradition therefore teaches a spiritual ecology of partnership with and mutual respect for all things sentient and insentient in the environment. The earth, the rivers, etc. are our mothers because they feed and nourish us. But if we pollute them, they don't feed us. They poison us. Same thing with the air. If we pollute the air, then that comes back to us. Yesterday I read in the paper that in New Delhi right now, if you are breathing in New Delhi, it's like smoking 44 cigarettes in one day. This is what it is. Yesterday's news. And so the environment can only support us as long as we feed and nourish all the elements in return and respect their beingness. And so to live a life of balance and harmony and peaceably coexist with all that there is and to give back all one has received is the duty of every householder in the tradition, in the Hindu tradition. It is like the practice of tithing in Judaism and Christianity. One is encouraged to give and share, and such an action is called Purta Karma. And if one is in a comfortable position, one is supposed to take care of the ones who are not. And the concept of poverty is relevant to both our tradition in yet another context, because we both have monastic orders. And in the Hindu monastic order, it is something that you grow into. We don't exactly take the vow of poverty. What we do is we during the time when we are ordained, we take the vow of abhaya dana, which means the giving of fearlessness by dropping out of all competition for resources. So it is not just, it's basically reducing every kind of footprint that it is. And that is what a Swami is. Someone who has shed the needs by shedding the desires, the intractable, unmanageable desires associated with those needs. If one is ready for it, it's a glorious life. If one is not, it can be hell on earth. Yeah. And so this is slightly different. So we don't take the vow of poverty, we take the vow of renunciation, renouncing all of the dependencies on various resources. That's why the Swami is not kept up. The Swami means you and the sky, that's all. There is no security for the morrow, no house, no stipend, no maintenance by an ashram or a temple. One lives on what one is offered voluntarily. So this is so that one can grow and to let go of everything that doesn't matter and to understand that other than God, nothing else matters, really. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that, in order to be relevant and work together and thrive in contemporary times, ancient religions like Catholicism and Hinduism, we have to do some things. One is to grow and adapt to the needs of the times and the people that we serve. And, we have to be relevant, especially to the youth. We really have to be relevant and we have to be able to reach them because the young adults are the leaders of the future. And secondly, we have to periodically conduct candid self-examination and the examination of our scriptures and be willing to engage in a hermeneutics of liberation and expound theologies of social justice. Third, we have to engage in dialogues with traditions unlike our own with the motive of listening and understanding to them. And I would also like to add here that with the motive of going beyond, like putting the reset button on troubled histories that we have shared in the past, where Catholicism and Christianity was used as a tool of colonialism. And so we have to craft a new covenant of relationship. So we see, just like I was very heartened to hear and read the Deepavali greetings. So that is an example of a new covenant of relationship, so that we go beyond this history and the pain of the past. Both as Hindus and Catholics, we have to grow beyond this pain, beyond whatever anger, misunderstanding and mistrust that we may have, because it is in our hands. And when we read the story of the life of saints in the Catholic traditions, life of Jesus, etc., it is very inspiring. And we can look to that and reset the button on new ways of interacting, being, respecting, and loving one another. Then we learn to eschew politicizing religions, especially at times of national or global crises, and learn to render service without expecting anything in return from the recipients, and without writing about it in our blogs, except as a way to encourage others perhaps. And in this regard, there is a lot that the Holy Father is doing, Pope Francis is doing with regard to climate change. And I'm sure that the Hindus would be very, very happy to join such kinds of initiatives. Then, finally, we teach and encourage religious heads that we have been given the fortune to train to model exemplary leadership that represents the best of our traditions, so that the religious leaders can be beacon of inspiration for all those who encounter them. There is a phrase in the Gita, Yadyad acharati shreshtaha tattadevetaro janah sayat pramanam kurute lokastad anuvardate. So as long as you are a Shrestha means a person of clout, a person who has a status in society, and you, whether you like it or not, whether you intend to or not, you inspire others. And so your actions become very, very important, that you exemplify the best of your religion if you are in a position to influence others. And then I would like to say that the Hindu and Catholic traditions have a lot to explore in common, and we can work together to set an example of interfaith harmony and coexistence, and to actively promote understanding and harmony among all religions. Thank you very much. Om Tat Sat.
Another round of applause for our keynote speakers. I think they both said a lot to think about, a lot to ponder over, and it's not easy to do that so easily. So it's not so easy to do it on our own. So what we have next, the second part of our session, is what did they say? So to unpack what they said, we have the next panel. The next panel consists of three individuals. Father James Reddington from the University of Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Dr. Abhay Asthana, President of VHP, Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, and Mr. Anuttama Dasa, the Director of International Communication of ISKCON. So they will give their perspective. Please come join us on the stage, all three of you. And they will give their perspective on what our keynote speaker said. And that will be hopefully somewhat brief. Come this way. There's stairs here. There's stairs too? Okay. Sorry. I didn't know. And then thereafter, we'll open up for questions. So the best way would be, I will bring the mic over here, and anybody who wishes to ask questions can come and line up here, and then you can ask questions of any of the five individuals who will be present on the stage. So I request all three of you to give your perspective on what you heard or anything else that you had in mind, briefly I should say, and then we will open up for questions. So in the order in which they came, so I would say Father Reddington, you can start, and then Dr. Abhay Asthana, and then Anuttama Dasa. You want to come here? You can. It's up to you.
Yeah. You're fine. You can sit there.
Okay, please. So after he's done, then Dr. Abhay Asthana can speak. And of course, I overlooked to introduce Mr. Narasimha. He will be the moderator for Q&A. So after they're done, then you can come here this side. Thank you. Please.
Microphones usually like my voice, so even though it's at a distance, I think it will carry. I'm First of all, even before addressing our wonderful speakers, I would like to express my own pleasure at being back at the Sri Siva Vishnu temple. At the time that the temple was contemplated and then being built and then dedicated and so forth, I was the professor of Hinduism at Georgetown University here, and a close friend, a dear friend and dialogue partner of Dr. Siva, who was one of the pillars of the founding of this temple and of its going on now. And so I've been to the temple very frequently and came to the dedication and was at the entire dedication when Dr. Siva dressed up and was one of the dedicating priests of that dedication of the temple. So I am more than happy to be back here with you. Thank you for inviting me. And now to our present work. First of all, a profound thank you to each of our keynote speakers, Archbishop Pierre and Swamini Svatmavidyananda, for analyzing these large topics in such a concise yet profound way. And so, to comment on just a few issues or points. With respect to Archbishop Pierre's presentation first. Solidarity, the virtue brought into such great prominence by Pope John Paul II, is a great help for common action for both of our faiths. In our mutual support of overcoming poverty, of making peace, of helping refugees, of acting against climate change and other ecological issues, and in many other needs of our world today. If we, Hindus and Catholics, act together in solidarity and with solidarity, that will deepen and make more effective our work. Now, the definition that Pope John Paul II gives to solidarity is a brief one, mercifully, as follows. Solidarity is a firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good. And I would like to add to that solidarity on the individual level, solidarity goes with a commitment to the dignity of each person. And thus, it was very natural, I think, and very well done that Archbishop Pierre put dignity and solidarity together. In addition, one thing that was not mentioned, on the collective level, solidarity goes with a commitment to our interdependence. Solidarity, when we have solidarity with another group or when several groups have solidarity with one another, it is a testament to and a continuing building up of our interdependence. Because just as we are and have dignity by being, so we are interdependent in our very being and by our very being. And so the collective side of solidarity, if you will, is that it displays well our interdependence. Secondly, from Archbishop Pierre's talk, I didn't read rightly. Patriotism that supports one's nation, culture, and religion need not go together with a narrow, fundamentalist national